Hello and welcome. Welcome back to the BarChats EnviroRights, everyone. My name is Jia from the Bar Council Environment and Climate Change Committee, and it is a great pleasure to welcome all of you to the webinar this evening. If it's your first time joining us, this webinar is part of a 5-episode series that aims to promote curiosity and healthy discussion about our right to be involved in the protection and management of our environment. This is a project by Malaysians for Malaysians. It's a series that is not your usual legal seminar where experts talk about specialist topics or the latest developments in the legal field. Instead, it is a series where exceptional human beings sit down together and share their knowledge and experience on environmental justice with lay Malaysians. 2 weeks ago, we started off with episode 0, our prelude episode, which was a discussion of how we ordinary Malaysians can direct our frustration and perhaps helplessness from cases like Sungai Kim Kim, Sungai Gong, towards something more constructive. And then in episode 1, we looked at where our environmental rights come from and what are they. Flowing from these 2 episodes, we are now ready to start with episode 2, how does the law protect the environment? Our moderator for this episode is Amin Abdul Majid. Amin is a partner at Zaid Ibrahim & Co. He regularly advises on renewable energy projects in Malaysia and the ASEAN region, and he has contributed to our country's renewable energy laws. Amin is also a member of our Bar Council Environment and Climate Change Committee. Now, before we start, I would like to mention 2 things. First, the thoughts and opinions of our panelists are personal to themselves and do not represent the organizations that they are associated with. Our webinars are meant to get people to ask more questions, hopefully better questions, rather than providing specific answers. So do not take anything mentioned here as legal advice for your specific situation. Now, secondly, we would love to hear from you. So please share your thoughts and your questions with us via the Q&A function on Zoom. And for those who are joining us from Facebook Live, post them in the comments section. All right, and those on social media, you can tag us with the handles #BarChats, #EnviroRights, and #BCECCC. With that, I will now hand it over to Amin to get things rolling. Over to you now, Amin.
Thank you, Jia. I think you can hear me fine, right?
Yes, okay. Loud and clear.
Welcome, everyone, and welcome to the panelists. Now, Malaysia has a population estimated at 32.7 million as at 2020. Malaysia has an abundance of natural resources with fertile soil for agriculture, large amounts of oil and gas, and also rich minerals underground. And we are extracting value from these gifts of nature, as we should. But as our populations grow, we're seeing the stress that we have had on our country's environment. Unfortunately, we have a long list of environmental disasters. Jaya has mentioned a couple, but there was also the Highland Towers tragedy in 1993, the Taman Hillview landslide in 2002, the Ululangat mudslide in 2011, and of course the pollution that we've just heard. And that's not to mention, but has now become the almost routine water disruptions in the Klang Valley. Now, all these can be directly traced to human action as our fellow Malaysians carry out economic activities with little regard to the environment. So what can we do about it? Do we have laws that protect the environment? And how do they work? And how do we ensure sustainability? That's making sure that the use of the environment by 32.7 million Malaysians today does not prejudice the use by future generations. All these are big questions, but they can be broken down into 4 broad parts. First, we will look at the main government bodies that are responsible for managing and protecting our natural environment. Next, we explore whether the decisions and actions of these institutions are open to question and how public consultation can come into play. Then we will look at the role of the judicial arm of the legal system in protecting the environment. And finally, we'll look at how the law works to make wrongdoers accountable. And with me today are 3 eminent panelists who will help me answer these questions. Ivy Wong Abdullah, Dato Mah Weng Kwai, and Dr. G. Balamurugan. Welcome. They are no strangers in the area of the environment and law. Ivy Wong Abdullah is currently the lead of the environment pillar at Yayasan Hasanah of Kazan National Berhad. She provides leadership and technical input on the environment focus area. Now, this includes building partnerships with key stakeholders in the environment and conservation arena in Malaysia and abroad to achieve Hasanah's mission to protect Malaysia's natural capital and resources through conservation efforts and the building of environment consciousness. IV has over 20 years of work experience on topics of biodiversity and forestry management and has engaged local and international NGOs, state, national, and regional governments, and the private sector in Malaysia. IV was in fact the 2016 Asia Fellow of the Low Emissions Development Strategy Global Partnership Program and a recipient of the MacArthur Foundation Fellowship. Dato Mah Weng Kwai, as many here will know, is a former Court of Appeal judge. Dato was called to the English Bar and the Malaysian Bar. He served in the Judicial and Legal Services of Malaysia and subsequently set up his own firm before appointed Judicial Commissioner of the High Court of Malaya in 2010 and a judge of the same court in 2011. He was elevated to the Court of Appeal in 2012. Upon his retirement from the judiciary, Dato Mah returned to legal practice. Among his many roles today, Dato Mah is an adjunct professor of law and government at Help University and a commissioner in SUHAKAM. Dato Mah was appointed a member of the Institutional Reforms Committee by the Prime Minister of Malaysia after the 14th general election to make recommendations for institutional reforms in the country. Now, Dr. G. Balamurugan is the Managing Director of ERE Consulting Group. Over the past 30 years, he has been actively involved in the planning and management of environmental and natural resources in the region. He has planned and managed over 250 consultancy projects in Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. And this covers a wide range of sectors from infrastructure, biodiversity, transportation, energy to water resources. He has also served as on a wide range of government agencies, private sector, and non-governmental organizations across Asia as advisor. Now, so to start, perhaps I should ask Dato Mah to discuss the main governmental bodies responsible for managing and protecting our natural environment. Dato Mah?
Thank you very much, Amin, and very good evening to everyone who is listening to this program. Allow me firstly to thank Jayao and the Bar Council for organizing these series of bar chats. I think they're all very useful and helpful to create awareness of the environmental laws and the situations that we are in from time to time. Allow me, I mean, I know we are not to go too deeply into the legal aspects of it, but with a topic like how does a law protect the environment, I think I have to very quickly touch on some of the main acts that prevail, some of the main statutes, and then ask the questions, who are the protectors and who are the decision makers and so on. In fact, when I was talking to a friend and told him about this evening's bar chat and told him the title was How Does a Law Protect the Environment? The cynical reply was, does it? So I suppose we will have to approach it from that point of view, because whether the law protects or does not protect, we still have to realize or understand what are the laws are that prevail. So very quickly, I think the first law that comes to mind when we talk about environmental protection in Malaysia is the Environmental Quality Act. That's 1974 Act. So it's a fairly old act, and under it you have the regulations and you have the various orders and so on. Then we have the Protection of Wildlife Act, 72 Act, the National Forestry Act, 1984, Fisheries Act, 1985, the National Parks Act, 1980, and also the Town and Country Planning Act of 1976. So one will note that these acts were passed quite some time ago. It's not as though it's something that happened overnight. And when we ask this question, does the law protect the environment? My quick answer or short answer is, there is a law. The law is there. But whether it works to protect the environment, I think it is not so much whether there's a statute to protect a particular aspect of the environment, but whether it has been properly enforced, then the next question to ask ourselves is, who are the protectors? Who are these people that ought to protect the environment? Again, a quick answer would be, it has to be the government bodies, the government agencies, because they are the planners, they are the managers, and they should be doing their best to protect the environment. But at the same time, I would expand this category not just to the government and statutory bodies. I would definitely say the protectors are ourselves, the NGOs and the CSOs, because all of us are have a role to play in this. Just like in the fight against COVID-19, we are all frontliners. So I would say, when it comes to protecting the environment, we too are the frontliners. Now, speaking personally, my association with the law on the environment and protection of the environment is very much through SUHAKAM of late, because in SUHAKAM, the right to clean water, the right to food and health and so on, these are fundamental rights. They are basic human rights. So when we talk about the environment and we say that we deserve to have clean water, and when there is pollution in the rivers and water plants shut down, then of course we say that our human rights have been infringed. So really, we have to look wider than just what the law is in the Environmental Quality Act. We have to look at it from the aspect of how it affects the ordinary person, to a flat dweller who lives on the 10th floor, who doesn't have the lifts to go up to his floor, and he has to carry buckets of water up. That's a terrible situation to be in. We are living in the tropics. There's no shortage of water, and yet the right to clean water has been affected because of polluters. So this is a very important decision that we have to do to support the government and the management. Then, of course, we have the decision makers. Again, the question is, who are these people? Are they faceless? Are they nameless? Are they sitting behind their desks in the department and nobody knows who they are? Well, again, this is where the need for transparency is very important. We have to know who the decision makers are, because whatever they decide will affect our quality of the environment.
That's a good point, Dato. And now that's the very point I was going to ask Ivy to speak on, because of her experience with the government ministries. Ivy, would you like to comment?
Thanks, Amin. Good evening, everybody, and Assalamualaikum. Thank you to Bar Council for this sort of very informal chats about the rights and also how does the law protect our environment. Following up from what Dato Mah was saying, we have the kind of institutions that looked at protecting our laws, also what we call the ministries. We have the Ministry of Environment and Water. I think that's the first, also the focal point. And I think by and large, ministries that we have in Malaysia sort of develop policies, provides guidelines, and also bring in, the laws that we have to be enforced. As Dr. Mah has mentioned, we have those laws since the 70s. And as the years go by, we do have the revision to those acts, and it's been, how should I say, passed by Parliament. And with that provision, I think the EQA was I think the latest that got amended, expanding its scope, right? So that comes under the Ministry of Environment and Water. So we have also the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources, and that looks at how our resources in the country, be it forests, be it minerals, are managed in the country, and providing guidelines and also, how should I say, provisions in how they should be extracted, or in terms of natural resources. We have also various other ministries that are in a way responsible for resources, like Ministry of Plantation, Industries and Commodities. So they are guided by certain guidelines of EIAs when they are looking at developing certain projects and also development, as you say that.
Thanks, Ivy. In fact, I think our next section also will be talking about how the laws, I guess, are revised and how the public can contribute towards that. But Doctor, in the meantime, Dr. Balamurugan, perhaps you might have something to say about your experience with the government agencies that you've been dealing with.
Oh, thank you, Amin. Good evening, everyone. To answer your question, my simple answer will be everyone is in charge and yet no one is in charge. Many different agencies and ministries and departments have jurisdiction. At the same time, there are a lot of gaps, and it's complicated by the fact that there are different jurisdictions between the federal and state governments. So it's not a very straightforward answer who's in charge. For example, if a factory pollutes, Department of Environment can prosecute. Then you need to ask the question, why is that factory in the wrong location in the first place? That goes into the jurisdiction, maybe town and country planning, or even state governments. So it's a lot more complicated than just one department being responsible. We need to look at the entire spectrum from the time land and land use is planned until the factory starts operating. So there are a range of agencies and departments involved. And I think we need to look at every one of their jurisdiction and responsibilities as well.
Now, thanks, Dr. Bala. I guess from what we gather from what the three of you have said, it's clear that we do have the laws. It's clear that they've been there since the 1970s. And it's clear we also have the government agencies and government ministries that are responsible for the implementation of these laws. And like Dato Mah correctly pointed out, the public also has a role to play. But it's quite, I guess what is apparent is that the first step still is that on the part of the ministry, they do have a public duty stemming from the laws that exist to protect the environment. But the issue that has arisen, which as Ivy has highlighted, is that sometimes they're just not up to date, or they're just not suitable for the specific situation that we have. So perhaps Ivy, you would like to say something about that?
Thanks, Amin. As what Bala has mentioned, we have those agencies. And I think backing up, I think Malaysia, as we know, we have, I would say, 3 regions. We have Peninsular Malaysia, Sabah, and Sarawak. Certain laws do apply, but not all laws apply across 3 regions. For example, the National Forestry Act 1984, that's only applicable for Peninsular Malaysia. So I think this has a specific impact on how you can apply them. With regards to how this has, how should I say, developed, and if you look at the Peninsula side in terms of states, Selangor has their Forestry Act that looks at having a component of public consultations, right? In any given land or a given forest reserve that the state wants to open up for development or for any activities, within the provision of its state enactment, it has to look at having a public consultations, right? But that is only unique to Selangor. Other states in Peninsula do not have that. And the Mother Act, as they call it, the National Forestry Act 1984, does not have that provision. So until and unless that main mother body, the Mother Act has that provision, then the states can take it up. But Selangor on itself has its own, how should I say, they went ahead and made that a component of their act, which is good. So Selangor is leading the way in terms of having that sort of consultations.
Okay, Dato Mah, now that we know Selangor has carried out a very commendable act, is there like any avenue for the normal person, the lay person, to question what other governments are doing. So for instance, is there an avenue for them to put some pressure for the other state governments to also follow the steps of the Selangor government?
Sorry, is the question addressed to me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I think when it comes to the role played by the public should take it upon themselves as watchdogs, and it is for us to actually keep questioning the state authorities. And when I say state authorities, it's not just the state government, but the federal government as well, because as we do know, there are three levels working together at the federal level, state level, and the local authorities. In fact, the local government authority, that's a very, very important stage, because they are right at the front and they are on the ground. So it's not just the state of Selangor, but since this environment is a national issue, it should be applicable in all the states. And I think the bottom line, I would like to say, is that it's not so much whether the law protects. I think while we realize and appreciate the law is there, what's really important to ensure that enforcement is taken seriously. The enforcers, the implementers of the various policies, various programs, they take it seriously. And when there are breaches committed by polluters and all the people who cause the pollution, they should come down very hard and have the full force of law taken against these people. So really, it's not just at the state level, but it should be taken at the national level. Thanks.
And then, so in terms of, you mentioned just now that the public should take an active role in protecting their environment, right? So I think that also links very nicely to what Ivy was talking about, public consultation as well. And I maybe Dr. Bala, you might be able to share any public consultation experiences that you've noticed Malaysia carry out in recent years. Sorry, Dr. Bala, I think you're on mute.
Yeah. Thanks, Amin. I think Malaysia has made some progress in terms of public participation compared to, say, 20 years ago. There was hardly any. But if you see now, there are many avenues for public to give their feedback. Ivy mentioned the forestry enactment in Selangor as an example. For many, many years, the Town and Country Planning Department has a component of public participation. Every plan done at the local and state levels are open for public review and comment. And these are done very regularly. The Department of Environment, under the Environmental Impact Assessment Order, all EIA reports are public documents, and they are usually open for a month for public to read and comment. Under the Railway Act, all railway projects are required to be displayed to the public for 3 months for public to comment. So there are many avenues. I'll just give you an example. The KL-Singapore High-Speed Rail, you're aware of that, right? So when it was being planned in 2018, the public consultation period attracted 30,000 public comments. So that's substantial. Yep. But I think what we need to do is, I think while there are platforms and avenues for public consultation, public to give their views, I think a lot of members of the public are not aware of existence of these platforms. And I think we perhaps need to publicize this a bit more so that public can give their comments when the platforms are already there.
Thanks, Dr. Bala. In fact, your point about the 30,000 questions is really relevant, because there is a question right now that I noticed. There's a comment because we talked about the Selangor government, and Ivy had pointed out how they do consultation. But a question raised by Justin here is that sometimes, there is public consultation, but what's less clear is how the Selangor government are obligated to respect the will of the public, which emerges from these consultations. Now, of course, the one issue is the how does anyone answer 30,000 questions, right? But then perhaps Ivy, would you like to give your views on that?
Yes, I think in terms of the implementation of the public consultation is, I think, very much dependent on the person, the department that's doing it, right? How far do they take that consultations in its earnest, right? But as a public or a citizen, at least I know that there is that platform for me to voice my concerns regarding a project, right? That's very important versus where there's no platform at all and there is no provision for it and they just carry on doing what they want, right? So at least there is a platform. But I think the question is in terms of how the authorities are taking the inputs and the comments provided and not merely just ticking a box. You know, the law says you have to do a public consultations, they're doing it, but whether it is by the intent to improve on the project and to understand the challenges versus then just ticking a box, right? So I guess it all depends on the capacity and the capability of the agencies that's doing that job as well. You don't expect overnight when that law gets passed that the department agencies themselves know what to do. Sometimes it is very much they don't know how to do it.
Okay, so I guess on the part of the government, sorry, on the part of the public also, there's a responsibility for them to be a bit, I guess, more understanding of the pressures that the government might be under when they open these kind of consultations. I also remember in the episode that we had last week with Dr. Shad Salim Faruqi, he did say, for example, with responsibilities, with rights comes responsibilities. So if you, as much as you like being able to view your thoughts, I think it should be a bit more informed comments as well. But then on the issue of the decision that is made by the government, there is a legal avenue on the part of the people as well. So if we are not happy with the decision that's made, there is something called a judicial review. Dato Mah, can you shed some light on what it means?
Sure. Judicial review is a very effective legal process where we are able to actually get the departments, like ministries, to court and to query the process of the decision making, more of querying the process rather than the decision itself. We want to know, it's all about transparency. We want to know how they arrived at a decision. Yeah, as I mentioned just now, rather than the decision itself. So this is a process that is heard by a High Court judge, and all will be laid bare when the counsel for the plaintiff is making the case and asking the departments to answer. So this is a very effective process.
Is judicial review common in Malaysia?
Oh yes, quite often we have reviews of ministerial decisions and so on, and it's always popularly known as the JR process, Order 53, and this is something which parties go to court. I think related to that, if I may just add a point here, is very important to see who the plaintiff is. Yeah, because if you are directly affected, of course, you can be the plaintiff and go for a judicial review. What if you are not directly affected? You are just a member of that community, member of a group that may be affected. Then the question is whether you have the locus, the standing to go before the court. And I think that is a very contentious issue. Over the years, the courts have been quite strict about this and say, hey, look, you don't really have a right to come to query the decision. You're not directly affected. And some courts have actually said you are a busybody, you know. So, but I think luckily over the years that the test of local standing has been relaxed a bit, and the courts do take it very seriously and say, look, if you are a affected person, yeah, you can bring a case to court. But that deals with a lot more. I mean, the discussion on JR can be much far-reaching and longer discussion needed.
Yeah, it probably won't be enough for this evening. Won't be enough for us to discuss it, right? But one thing I do want to raise with you is I noticed in I believe it was episode 0, our prelude, there were a lot of questions about, oh, we're afraid of retaliation if we do these things. What's your views on that?
Retaliation from?
If we object or we protest against actions that are done by either the government or specific ministries, there's a fear of retaliation. What's your view on that?
I don't think we need to be too worried about that. It should be too bothered. This is 2020, and I think the government ought to be alive to the problems that the public face. If one avenue is to go to court, and the other is that we complain, and if there's any retaliation, as you mentioned, come to SUHAKAM, come and lodge a complaint with us, and we will hold inquiries, or we'll do the necessary to get to the bottom of it and see who is really causing the trouble. Because I think the government officials, they do realize, they do know that their job is actually to help and protect the public, help to protect the environment. You may have one or two wayward officers, but I don't think we'll paint everybody with the same brush. And but the short answer to that is that the access to court, that's very important. The right of access to courts and right to justice. We are getting there slowly, and with good lawyers like yourself and everybody else in Bar Council, I think we can make a difference.
Thanks, Dato. Now, that I guess we can now segue to the last part of what we wanted to cover tonight, which was apart from what we've said. Also, I've mentioned earlier about the public protesting and objecting. There is also a legal system or a legal process that exists for us to be able to put wrongdoers accountable. The government can prosecute offenders under criminal laws through the laws that you've mentioned, Dato Mah. And we are also aware of different ministries and departments taking action. Now, I think Ivy has some issues about that. I had some discussions with her earlier, and then she does come from a point where she's quite frustrated with what's happening. Can you share with us, Ivy?
Oh, wow. I mean, okay. Not to say, okay, frustrated is one, but I think when we look at natural environment, we have to look at as a whole system approach, right? Or, you know, in some ways we look at we always say a whole nation approach, but if you bring it down to look at a certain environment, we look at it from the point of whole system or whole natural ecosystems, and how do we tackle it? That there is that provision to protect it, and there's also a role for people, the civil servants, but the public having a role to play in this, right? Where do they come in, right? And how do you look at identifying what are the challenges, and how do you then address them, be it through the law systems, but I think in the case of where we're going for is to look at a particular river basin, right? Who holds jurisdiction over it? Because you have to look at it from the point of where the source of it to where does it flow out to, and really marked out who's inside that whole, you know, left and right of the river systems, who controls it, which local council manages it. Then we can look at how do we then work together to improve the systems and the habitat that we're living in, or the ecosystem that we're in.
What do you think? I mean, so we do have a role to play, but then what do you think about the media and how the role that they play to kind of assist this process?
Well, I think everybody have a role to play, even the media, to highlight the positive side and not just the negative sides, right? We have those parts of our country that is beautiful. The water system is amazing. But then when we come to a city, the rivers that flow through it, some cities have very nice river flow through it. Some don't. Selangor, unfortunately, living here, we see most of our rivers polluted. It's overdevelopment, right? How do we address this? How do we then mitigate all these issues? I think there needs to have a very more open discussions between all parties to try and find a solution to it.
Thanks, Ivy. Dr. Bala, any comments on your side?
Okay, on the topic of enforcement, I think we need to give credit where it's due. If you're again looking at long-term patterns, if you look in the 1980s, hardly anyone went to court for environmental offences. In the 90s, you start seeing 1 or 2 cases going in, significant increase in the year 2000 onwards, and now you are seeing lots of cases going to court and people are being fined substantial amounts. So there is a positive trend in terms of enforcement. Of course, it's not good enough, but it is definitely improving. But we also have to look into what are the challenges in enforcement. If somebody is polluting in Selangor, that's probably the easiest offense to catch. But then sometimes they pollute at night. They just open the locks at night and release all the effluent when no one is around. But a lot more complicated cases are like poaching, illegal hunting in the middle of our thick forest. We have a lot of cases of poachers coming in from Thailand and Cambodia into our forest to take our wildlife. And those kind of enforcement is very, very challenging. You're talking about rangers have to walk on foot for 7 days to reach those sites. So there are obviously significant challenges. And I think many government agencies face constraints in terms of manpower and equipment. Now, if you want to send a ranger in the middle of Taman Negara, either he walks 7 days or you drop him on a helicopter. And Department of Wildlife doesn't have a helicopter. So these are some of the challenges. And I think linked to the topic of public participation, I think the public has a role even in enforcement, acting as eyes and ears. But what we need to do is create platforms and networks so that public's input can be better utilized. At the moment, it's very ad hoc. But I think if we have a better system whereby public can complain, send a photograph, and it reaches the right person immediately, then I think our enforcement will become better. Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Bala. You mentioned the environmental courts. I think Dato Mah might have something to say about that.
Yes, but before I go into that, just to elaborate on what Dr. Bala has mentioned, I think that's absolutely correct, because the public are the eyes and the ears. But I find in my experience and living in a fairly close community, is that the role of the RAs, residents associations, they are a very important group of people, because they are in a community and you have representatives in a community. And the moment something is not quite right within that area or even the adjacent areas, you'll find people bringing issues up at the RA meetings. So then when a complaint is made as a group to, say, the local town council, I think that carries a bit more weight than just an individual who's making a complaint. So RAs are quite useful in this respect. Yes, we were talking about the environment courts. Now, as far as the court process, now earlier on I did mention about the judicial review. That's for cases going up to the High Court. But when it comes to offences against the various acts, they don't have to end up in the High Court. very often they're dealt with in the magistrates court and in the sessions courts. So what has happened in 2012, the former Chief Justice actually had magistrates courts and sessions courts designated as environment courts. In fact, started off with 53 magistrates courts and 42 sessions courts. So they were very important because these are courts at first instance, and you will deal with the whatever legal complaints that are coming to court. And but that was all for the criminal side of things, criminal jurisdiction, meaning to say offenders will be prosecuted. Then in 2016, the jurisdiction was extended to include civil jurisdiction. And now sessions courts, magistrates courts, and the high courts have this jurisdiction.
If I may interrupt you, right there, Dato Mah, I think because our talk today is not just people from the Bar Council, the Bar Council, perhaps from the Bar, I mean, perhaps you could tell for the benefit of everyone the difference. What's this criminal law and civil law? How are they different?
Okay, fine, sure. Criminal law, criminal offense, or criminal jurisdiction of the court is where an offender is pulled up by the enforcement agency. They brought to court. Let's say a person that has been caught doing open burning. Yeah, you're not supposed to open burning. The offender is brought to court, is brought to the magistrate's court, and when the case is proven against him, the penalty is usually a fine. I have not heard of any offender for open burning being imprisoned. And when it's a fine, that penalty goes towards the government. It goes towards revenue. Yeah, it doesn't go to the courts, and most certainly it doesn't go to the department. But when it comes to a civil case, and let's say you have somebody complaining against a neighbor for dumping garbage onto his land and causing damage and so on. So that person can bring a civil case, and his remedy is in terms of damages. So he would be paid by way of compensation, whatever damage has been caused by the defendant. The defendant will not go to jail. Defendant will not be fined, but he will have to pay damages to the plaintiff. So that's a broad distinction between criminal and civil cases. So while on that, I think I would like to also to mention that the case need not stop at the magistrates level or the sessions courts level, because as you know, we also have the appeal system. Yeah, you're not happy with the decision, you can appeal from the magistrates court and sessions court to the high court and even to the court of appeal, because we do have a maximum of a two-tier system. So people who feel that they have been wronged can come to court, and those who are in the wrong, well, be forewarned, because the law is there. There's no doubt about it. It's just a question of taking action under the law. Yeah.
Thanks, Dato. Now, there is a question that has been raised about, and I understand if the panelists are not able to answer this, but I just felt that this is a good point in which I should insert it, because we're talking about how parties can be made accountable for the wrongs that they do towards the environment. So there's a question from Fazlina Pawante, where she's asking, do you know of any best practices that other countries are doing, and the types of effective enforcement strategies that have been adopted that can be effective for environmental offences in Malaysia? Perhaps I just open it to whoever can give a comment.
Let me start, Amin. Let me try. First, I think the penalty itself needs to be enhanced. I think, and we have made progress under the Environmental Quality Act. Long time ago, the fines were like 2,000 ringgit or 3,000 ringgit. Now you see fines going into the hundreds of thousands. So that is progress. But I personally think that is not high enough, and we need to see higher penalties. But sometimes it's not, my experience would be sometimes the courts are not sympathetic towards the departments. The department might push for a higher fine, but the courts will give a much lower fine. So the penalties needs to be significantly increased. The second problem that we need to deal with, I think as far as resources for enforcement, we simply do not have enough resources, right? And what I think what the government has tried to do is try to get various different ministries to work together to go after the same culprit. Now, for example, if just a factory pollution, if you depend on Department of Environment alone, it's not going to happen. There are hundreds of thousands of factories in the country, and they simply do not have enough enforcement officers. So the strategy is, how do we make use of multiple agencies and departments so that we pool resources and to go after the culprits. If you depend on one department, it's not going to happen. Yep, thank you.
Okay, let me take a stab at that, Amin. I think in terms of enforcement, we don't have to look far. Our neighbors, Singapore, are quite good at making sure compliance is followed by its citizens as well as the industries that they have with regards to environment and the pollution aspects. So that quite strong from Singapore. And I think one country that you could look at for sure will be China, right? So they are going strong in terms of moving towards how their resources are supposed to be managed sustainably and also addressing the pollutions, right? So they made headway for Beijing, right? They've shut down most of the industries. So this is a recent event, but I think the fallback is to other surrounding countries. Like, they've made improvements in terms of stop receiving plastics from other countries for the dispose of, right? But then the fallback, the ripple effects to all of us in this region. So we have to look at where law by law itself. So just looking at those two countries could be a start for us in terms of moving forward. But our laws in the countries are very thorough, right? We have very good laws. I think in the country, it's just a matter of enforcement and bringing them to court. A lot of cases, they're just settled at just paying the compound. And many a times you see the same culprit going to court, but not being prosecuted because they just say, okay, the judge will just say, settle the fine, that's it. But it's the same company back and back again. So this has been reported from one of my friends who sits in to listen about environment courts and how it's proceeding.
I see.
Yeah, if I may add to that, Amin, talking about the disposal of solid waste. Now, for the life of me, I cannot understand why Malaysia allowed the import of solid plastic waste into the country. And I think the former minister did a marvelous job in returning solid plastic waste to 13 countries. Can you imagine countries around the world are treating us like a one big rubbish dump? Already we have so much plastic waste generated by our own people, own public, and yet we are importing solid waste. Why? Because it's all because of money. And people are greedy and they just can't stop trying to make more and more money. So I think when cases like that occur, the law should really be implemented to the fullest and drag these people to court and maybe lock them up and throw away the key. I'm exaggerating. But the other point which was raised by Dr. Bala is a question where agencies bring cases to court and the courts are not sympathetic. I think there is a very good case to say that magistrates and sessions court judges need to have training in environmental issues, human rights issues, and it's all a question about capacity building. One cannot assume that because you're appointed as a magistrate, appointed as a sessions court judge, you might be a very good lawyer, but you may have little or no knowledge about environmental issues and human rights issues. So capacity building must be ongoing. People must be sent for training and so on. Then I think you will see a difference, and not just react when you are affected personally. You must look at the bigger picture and say, what can we do or what should we do when the whole community is affected? Maybe on a last word on that particular point is that we all the time talking about protection of the environment and what how it's done. I think a lot more emphasis should be placed on prevention, preventing the commission of offences, rather than trying to remedy the situation. A good example, we have all this river pollution, starting with Sungai Kim Kim, Sungai Gong, Sungai Semenye, and quite a few others recently. And what happens is that everybody is running around to try to trace the polluter. I think we are many steps behind, because really when factories are allowed to be located near rivers and water sources, all this should have been taken into account and prevented. Don't give them licenses to have factories so near riverbanks and so on. So it's all part of the prevention process. Thank you.
Thanks. I liked your comment about the judges, because, you know, we always assume judges know everything, but the reality is, of course, you know, they are experts in their specific fields as well, and sometimes they might not be as, I guess, not so familiar with environmental terms, for instance.
Right, right.
Now, in the discussions that we've had, it's quite clear that the laws all exist. The laws that protect the environment exist. And we all now know that there are two basic arms that protect the environment in implementing the laws. So the executive arm, as we understand it, has the legal duties to plan, protect, and manage the environment. It is this arm that government bodies and agencies function under, and where normal citizens can lodge complaints and reports. Whereas the judicial arm, like you mentioned, Dato Mah, is where the courts, criminal and civil function under. And this is where lawsuits are filed when other grievance mechanisms have failed in the executive arm to ensure that your rights are protected. Now, as ordinary citizens, you can and should file lawsuits under the civil courts in circumstances where you have been aggrieved. Now, that brings us to a close to our discussion, but we have some really good questions that have come up from our audience. I'll just go through them very quickly. I think one which is relevant was very relevant to what we have said and discussed just now. Remember, we're talking about public consultation. So there was a question from an anonymous attendee. He or she is asking that whether it's possible that the implementation of the law be suggested from the bottom line, meaning the people, to the upper line, which is the government. Because his or her view is that in order to make a decision about the environment, we need to involve more parties on board, especially those that have expertise in a certain field. It is unfair to only have the politician or government as the decision maker. What are the panel's thoughts?
Can I start first?
I'll open that to the panel.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give it a go first. Yeah, no, personally, it's my strongest belief that public participation is crucial, and we are not doing enough. And I think with greater public participation, many things will improve. Better enforcement, better planning, better design of projects, and so on. But for public participation to improve, we need to do a few things. I think first, the public must be made aware that there are platforms for them and they can use that. At the moment, I think many people are not aware of the platforms that exist. There are many platforms and people must be made aware of them. And number two, on the government side, I think, again, public consultation is not something that everybody likes to do because it's never pleasant to deal with an angry person. Yep. So public participation, public consultation, even people in the government private sector needs to be trained how to conduct public consultation. How do you handle a big crowd? How do you do town hall sessions? How do you handle public consultation so that you get effective feedback? And I think those are skills that are lacking at the moment, be it within government or the private sector. And that's something that I've always been pushing, that we need to build capacity on how to conduct public consultation so that we get meaningful feedback from the public. Thank you.
I mean, if I may add to that, please. One way to have consultation, at least to have a platform to discuss the issues, is to attend conferences or RTDs, roundtable discussions, and webinars such as this, which are being organized from time to time. Again, speaking about SUHAKAM, we have been fairly active in organizing programs on the right to clean water, climate change, environmental rights, and so on. And these are made available to the public. Anyone who wants to attend these sessions, most welcome. It's free. And when we have this dialogue between SUHAKAM commissioners and members of the public, these are all recorded and made into, rather, we come up with recommendations after the sessions, and these are then forwarded to the relevant departments. So for departments to then turn around and say, we don't know this or we don't know that, oh, we can always pull one out from the drawer and say, look, we have been talking about this, you have been notified. So this is an ongoing dialogue which can be further enhanced. And of course, the other is through social media. I suppose when you have consultation, you need to talk to somebody in particular, but when people post their comments and air their grievances, they are doing it to the general public. But again, many useful points can be picked up from the social media. You'll get a pulse, you feel the pulse of how people think and why are people so angry, so annoyed about certain issues. Yeah, and there's a question of escalating and bringing up the issues right up to the top, to the people. Eventually, it's the ADUN and the MP that we should all catch hold of and say, hey, look, this is happening in your area. Don't just ignore it, because people will have their say in the next 5 years.
Yeah, so avenues exist. Ivy, I think you're
Yes.
about to say something.
Yes. Just chipping into the point where Bala talked about, public participation and public consultations. I think the whole point is everybody has a role to play, but we have to look at it from the point of being constructive. If you want to get anything done, you have to be constructive. I know sometimes people are angry and they don't see beyond that. But if you want to be more effective, you have to be constructive and you have to learn to understand what's the situation, right? For example, the Selangor Forestry Department's public consultation requirement under the Act, that is from a point forward, right? That law is not retrospective, right? Maybe a decision has been made in the past regarding a certain developments, and it's only now that it's sufficing. So from the point of when the law has been sort of adopted, it's going forward. I don't think it's retrospective. So I think there's a lot of details that needs to be unpacked when you look at the issues and also the laws that can help to prevent that. As what Dato Mah mentioned, when you come to the law side, it's already a prevention. So we should look at really, it's about earlier actions and preventing that from happening.
Thank you, Ivy. Now, I would love to go into more of the questions, but I'm conscious of the time. We have now hit 9:30. There are about 10 more questions, but I think what we'll do, I hope the panelists, I won't torture you with all 10. And what we will do is we will send these questions to you privately, and then perhaps you could spend some time giving the answer so that we can give them to our the participants and listeners who are tuning in. Now, thank you very much for the input and feedback that was given. I don't have much time, but just to wrap up again, through this exercise that we've had today, through this webinar, we've now identified what are the laws, and the laws exist. We've now identified the people who are responsible and have been given the mandate to enforce these laws. And we've also identified who are given the mandate or the responsibility to make sure that these laws are properly applied. And then, of course, in the course of our discussion also, it was very clear to us of the role that the public should play too. So this will actually be a nice way for us to leave off, and it'll segue very nicely to the next episode, which Jaya will touch on very shortly.
All right. Thank you, Ivy, Dato Mah, and Dr. Bala, and Amin too for moderating the excellent sessions. Splendid discussions. I just wish we had more time to pick the panelists' brains and to unpack more of these themes that were touched on very briefly. But yes, big thanks also to our audience out there for tuning in and putting forward excellent questions and comments. So please have our apologies for not being able to go through all of them. I hope you found the episode to be useful, right, in giving you an idea of how the law operates to protect and manage our environment. I hope this helps in building up a basic foundation for you in your understanding of environmental rights. In the next episode of BarChats EnviroRights will be episode 3, happening on 4th November, this coming Wednesday at 4 p.m. The title is Who Said It Is Easy? Accessing Environmental Justice. You see, we've so far described what our environmental rights are and how they work without going into their challenges and shortcomings in too much detail. In episode 3, we go into that. This next episode will give a fuller picture of what the challenges are when somebody wants to enforce or protect his or her environmental rights or take action against any sort of environmental injustice. The aim of this upcoming episode is to help you be more effective in making the most of your rights under a system that may not be perfect. Now, you can find the updates on the speakers and the upcoming episodes on the Bar Council Environment and Climate Change Facebook page. Please share, like, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Until we meet again next on the 4th of November, thank you all for tuning in. Have a very good evening. Thank you.